Welcome to Focal Point, a show where we invite thought leaders from business, government, and our communities to share with us their journeys of success and failure, innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as their visions for Hong Kong and the world. What is the worst decision you think you have made in the last 10 years? You obviously made a lot.
There's so many.
You made so many
hard.
good decisions, but what is one of the worst ones?
Okay, I have reflected on this, and I do think the worst choice strategically was actually for us to open offline retail stores, and we did that in 2017 through 2019, and I think to a little bit of a blessing in disguise that we kind of scaled down on the offline retail network right before the pandemic.
Right.
But I think I won't say it was a worse or bad decision. It was just not right for us. Because the team, the DNA of our existing team, we're very digital native. We're like media company, right, and then e-commerce. And I think culturally and from a management perspective, it was very new for us to manage a brick and mortar offline business. And we had a lot of cultural clashes between the retail team and e-commerce. E-commerce, we want everything fast. We gotta do first and then figure out later. But then retail, you can't really rush things.
Yeah.
And so I think that was probably a decision that was long, right? To realize it wasn't the right fit, and it was not cheap. So I think that was probably one of the more expensive.
So monetarily, it was one of the worst decisions.
Yeah, that's right.
But in order to expand globally, again, more challenges, right? Because I think it's actually if you succeed, and I really hope you succeed, because you will be definitely one of the few companies recently, as I can remember, out of Hong Kong that will, consumer-wise, expand successfully globally. Right? This is a great thing for Hong Kong as well. And of course, you might or might not know this, but you are clearly an example for all the entrepreneurs, all the young people in Hong Kong for what you have done. So, what would you give? What advice would you give young people today? Because a lot of challenges, I think, are also facing our young people. Some people would think it's lack of opportunities, right? There's a ceiling, the extreme wealth gap, et cetera, et cetera. But you seem to come around and did very well with that. What would be your advice to young people today who maybe looking at this video wants to follow your footsteps or thinking about entrepreneurship?
Okay, I think my one advice would be just to not fear the potential or possibility of failure. Because I think a lot of times it's just up to us to make things work, and no one's going to be there to tell you exactly, hey, you're going to do 1, 2, 3 and A, B, C, then there you go, you're going to be successful. There's always going to be a lot of unknown, right? And there's always a chance to fail. But I think it's important for us to, especially the earlier, the younger, the better, that we understand failure is part of the process to becoming successful. Because during each failure, you actually learn and adapt and iterate, so your next attempt is going to be that much more successful and that much better. And so without being vulnerable to that failing process, it's hard for us to come out to become very successful, especially when during the current environment where there's a lot of obstacles or hurdles and along the way. So it's important to have that mindset ready.
Any organizations, people that you think could help in this process? For example, a lot of governments actually in the world are doing a lot to try to help their companies, right? Local startups, etc. I think Hong Kong government has done some as well. What is your view about kind of the Hong Kong startup, entrepreneurship ecosystem? What are some of the pros, some of the cons, being part of it? Is there anything else perhaps the government or the community can do better to foster this entrepreneurship more?
Well, I think for the past 10 years, if I compare the environment and the ecosystem that we have now versus 10 years ago, I think it's night and day already.
Better, I hope.
for much better. I mean, now we have a lot of access to capital.
Yeah.
And I think it's also easier to recruit talent. I think 10 years ago it was much more difficult to find capital or individuals that are willing to take that risk with the entrepreneur. And also a lot of students would actually opt to work for a big corporation instead of working for a startup or starting their own startup. And that's completely changed already. I mean, of course, there's a lot more we can do, right? But I would say that we have done a pretty good job in the past 10 years to build that foundation for even better ecosystem going forward. In terms of organization, I mean, once again, I think it's all about this process, and this process is no one's going to hand us this perfect solution or roadmap or safety net. It's just a process of self-discovery, like what you're made of, right? When you are faced with a challenge or when things don't happen according to plan, how are you going to react, right? How are you going to lead your team?
Yeah.
So it's a discovery process that nobody else but yourself and no organization can fully prepare you for it. So I think it's just putting one foot ahead of another to kind of take that journey and stick with it.
It sounds like you have to take the responsibility of yourself, right? Make the mistakes and know that, admit, just like you did, admit to the fact that you sometimes make mistakes, but move on.
That's right.
You obviously started in Hong Kong, you expanded your business into China, and now you just mentioned that you went to Canada, right? So do you have a particular view, from where you're sitting, from these three areas, or maybe the US even? What are the differences between the ecosystems? How they helped entrepreneurs, or how business is done? Any comparisons?
Mm-hmm. Well, to the best of my knowledge in terms of Hong Kong and mainland China, the differences is, I think the whole, investor or capital infrastructure is a lot more mature and maybe bigger in the mainland China market, right? Obviously, because it's a much larger market.
Sure.
And so getting access to funding, it would be comparatively easier, right? And by the way, these are all generalized commentation. But then, for other things like, hiring people, I think in mainland China, you also have access to a much bigger pool of, talent. But at the same time, on the flip side of that coin is there's also a lot more, entrepreneurs. And then I think the competition for the capital and the talent is also much stronger. And so, I would say every market would have their own, pros and cons. In Hong Kong, I think it's a small enough city that you can, test out your ideas or your product. And the consumer in general are much more international. So, they're open to try new things. And then, once your product or your services works here, then you can, consider taking it elsewhere. Because, of course, one of the challenges of starting a business in Hong Kong is either you have money and you have the market, but still there's a ceiling of potential addressable market, right? The size of the market is small at the end of the day.
Yep.
So you would then have to think about how to expand your business elsewhere. So that might not. I mean, if you compare that aspect, right? You built something in Hong Kong, you're like, okay, now I'm going to expand to Southeast Asia or mainland China. The same thing is I think the same, to a certain extent, you can still say that it's true as well in the US. Because and by the way, I've never started a startup in the US, so I don't really know. But my friends who are entrepreneurs in the US would tell me that sometimes consumer behavior are also very different from East Coast to West Coast. So they might have built something in San Francisco, then they're gonna go to New York, right? Yeah. So I mean, there are so many similarities and differences in between all these international markets. In terms of startup ecosystem, we can't really say that, Hong Kong is the best place for everybody. But it could be for some individuals, right? Some early founders that want to test something out. So, it really just depends on your style as an entrepreneur.
No. I mean, I have some experience with countries like Sweden, right? And I read and talked to people in Israel. These are very small markets, right? Sweden's literally the size of Hong Kong. It's 8 million people, but it's a country. And if you look at their startups, and of course the Israeli startups, there's tons of them, right? And quite a few of them actually has matured and became unicorns and global businesses. I think it's because precisely they're small to begin with. The founders there, when they built these businesses, came with the mentality that this has to go overseas.
They have to take over the world.
It can't be just Sweden or it can't be just Hong Kong, right? But I think, relatively speaking, in these areas, it's probably easier to set up a company. I mean, I set up companies in Hong Kong as well. It's actually quite easy. I would say it's probably easier than China, right? And I think in the past, capital was not that abundant. China clearly had more capital, but I think recently it feels that there are more, like as you mentioned, there are more capital coming in, and there's a bit more of an ecosystem of other founders that you can talk with and things like that. So perhaps that's a little bit of the Hong Kong advantage, if you will.
Yeah, and everything takes time, right? And we're talking about ecosystem here. It's going to take decades to build something, and and it takes time because it takes time for the earlier startup to grow to a certain size.
Yep.
And then during this process, there are going to be more and more stakeholders to believe in these startups in
Yep.
these smaller places.
Yeah. No pressure, because everyone's gonna be looking at you.
Thanks.
Because if you're successful, more people will come.
Yeah.
And they will build, right? Because you're an example, and I think it's with everything else. People see an example, they go, oh well, if you can do it, that means maybe I can do it.
Yes, and then I totally agree. I mean, that's one of my own motivation to do this and do the whole U.S. listing, because if you look at the statistics, right, for female founders who take their company public in the recent years, there's only like 22 or 23. It's like 3% or 4% of all companies that are listed. So it's something that I do want to achieve, and hopefully we can inspire more female founders to do the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. Would you be the first one?
No, I'm not the first one for sure. Yeah, I'm like number 20 something.
No. The first Hong Kong female entrepreneur.
That I don't know.
Actually, you might very well be one. We should go check on that.
Okay, we'll check on it.
I also understand that you consider public service before, right? Which I think, again, in young people in Hong Kong today is not common, right? Tell us a little bit about that. What was your thought process behind that? What were you trying to achieve? What was the thinking?
I think the thinking is always about having the ability to do something and thinking that you're the right person for it. And so at that time, I think that I can contribute and I can help. And so that's the most fundamental reason for me to do anything. Maybe starting a business, public service, or even starting this, accelerator program. It's the same thing. Like my mission was to build a food tech ecosystem in Hong Kong because I think it's worth doing, and I'm the right person to help that. So I think that's the reason why I wanted to do that before. And obviously for a lot of reasons, and it didn't continue. But I think in the future, I want to think that I'm still young.
You are.
So potentially that can be another opportunity down the road. But who knows?
But you are doing something, right? I mean, the Good Food movement is one of the things that you're helping with the ecosystem.
Yeah. So there are different ways we can all contribute. And it can come in all shapes or forms, and there's no right or wrong way to do it as long as we are coming from the right place.
Yeah. No, I think everyone should really kind of learn from you and take what you've done as an example. I think the thing that I heard today is really just not be afraid to fail and take responsibility for your own decisions and what you have done. Now, as we wrap this up, maybe you can share with us a little bit. I just like to ask my guests this. Share with us something that you haven't shared before with other people, like some interesting facts and tidbits about yourself.
I thought all that about my childhood was enough, but
No. We need something juicier.
Some juicier, okay. How about something positive and then something funny?
Okay. Funny is good.
Funny is good?
Doesn't need to be positive.
That I used to be a really chubby child. That's funny.
Okay. I'm sure there's no photos to.
There are tons of photos. I'm gonna send you one. If you can add it to the video clip, you can totally share that.
We might do that. We will do that. Okay.
It's very cute. That's one fact that not a lot of people know.
Okay.
And then the other positive one is actually I'm a early person. I like to wake up really early every day, right? Except when we have parties. So I do wake up really early every day. I appreciate that whole, 2-3 hours in the morning when nobody is around me and I can just do my own thing. And I do my hike every morning, 10 kilometers, so roughly 6 miles every day.
Every day 10 kilometers?
Yes. and it's like a 90 to 120 minutes of walking meditation, I call it. And sometimes I'm in a rush and I have to run, but mostly just walking.
And you do this every day?
Every day.
Rain or shine?
Rain or shine, yeah. Definitely rain or shine, except, occasionally I have a dinner party that leads to a lot later in the evening, then I would have to, go for a swim instead. But I definitely do 6 times a week.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, that's a good tip for everyone to know. So not enough just to have a strong mind, but have a healthy body as well.
Yeah.
Consistency.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much today for joining us and sharing with us so candidly about all these information and secrets that you hold. Best of luck for the next 10 years, next 20 years to DayDayCook and
Thank
to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
Enjoyed it? Please follow our Patreon channel to learn more about international business, entrepreneurship knowledge, latest innovation, and scholars' insights, and even more. See you soon.